Welcome everyone. Hello, my name is Jen Kavexis. I'm the program director at Colorado State University's Salazar Center for North American Conservation. Thank you for joining us today for this Connecting for Conservation webinar, Flowing Across Boundaries, a story of Indigenous-led collaboration among nations to protect salmon and an Indigenous culture in the Wolastoq. I would also like to acknowledge and thank the Maliseet Conservation Council for their help throughout this process to put this webinar together. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the land I am on today is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations and people. This was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for numerous other native tribes. I recognize the Indigenous peoples as original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it. For those of you who are new to the Salazar Center, we were established in 2016, and our mission is to connect diverse leaders, communities, and resources across North America in order to accelerate the pace and scale of innovative, inclusive, and durable solutions for conservation, climate resilience, and social equity. Among our many programs, we host these types of convenings to bring thought leaders together to share best practices and elevate important issues in conservation. Before I introduce our speakers, I have a few housekeeping items for today. This webinar is recorded and will be shared with you afterwards via email, and then it will be posted on our website. We're going to hold questions until after all of the speakers have completed their presentations. Please use the chat feature, not the Q&A feature, to post any questions or comments that you may have. I also wanted to let you know that in addition to the webinar we're having today, we have an exciting lineup of webinar series throughout throughout April and early May that we're doing in partnership with the Center for Collaborative Conservation, Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, and Denver Museum of Nature and Science. We'll be hosting a series on grassland conservation. You can find some more information about that in the chat. So today, we are honored to have 4 distinguished speakers with us that will provide context and background on an exciting Indigenous-led transboundary effort to protect salmon and Indigenous culture in the Wolastoq River, which connects New Brunswick in Canada and Maine in the US. First, we will open with a traditional prayer given by Patricia Saulis, who's Executive Director of the Maliseet Conservation Council based out of New Brunswick, Canada. Then we'll hear from our first panelist, Chief Clarissa Sabattis, who is Chief of the Houlton Band of Maliseet Indians based in Maine. She'll be followed by Chief Ross Perley, who is Chief of the Tobique First Nation of the Maliseet Nation in New Brunswick, Canada. Our last panelist, rounding out our panelists this morning, will be Ken Maraf, who is Director of the Water Division, EPA New England Region. Again, we're going to hold all the questions until after all of the speakers have completed their presentations. Then we'll have a Q&A session, and that will be followed by Patricia offering a closing for this webinar with a traditional closing prayer song. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the digital mic over to Patricia to open this webinar. Patricia, if you'll please.
Quay, it is a great honor to be here today with all of you and to be providing an opening and a closing to our event. We recognize the importance of spirit and the spirit of our ancestors to this work that we do. And so we acknowledge that connection, and I will sing a brief opening song for you. Wolastoq River, Ajide Bamigo, Wolastoq River, Zubelia, Niguas Bamepin, Wazizichnelaskavil, Niguas Bamepin, Wazizichnelaskavil. Wolastoq River, Ajide Bamigo, Wolastoq River, Zubelgia Niguas Pamipin Wazizichnillaskamil Niguas Pamipin Wazizichnillaskamil. Hollywood.
Gwe, Nildaliwis Zagames Clarissa Sabattis. Hello, my name is Chief Clarissa Sabattis, and I am a member of the Houlton Band of Maliseet Indians, or Miidaqsinagiwiyik. We're one of 8 Wolastoq First Nations who continue to inhabit our traditional territory of the Wolastoq or St. John watershed. This area includes a section of the Quebec borderland, the northeastern portion of Maine, and through New Brunswick, Canada, where the river flows into the Bay of Fundy. Next slide, please. There we go. So this is a map that shows our traditional territory of the Wolastoq, or people of the beautiful flowing river. Our ancestors predate this international borderline and excuse me, have inhabited the land along these rivers and waterways from time immemorial. Being a riverine people, the water has always been at the center of our existence, from sustenance to ceremony. And I believe that this is why it's so important to have Indigenous-led watershed management. Next slide, please. Oh. Early records show that during the early part of the century, salmon entered the river in abundance, more especially in the vicinity of Houlton, Maine, where they continue to be plentiful until shut out by dams in 1832. On the left, you'll see algal blooms. This is in our Mactaquack River. This is a result of wastewater discharge. And our Natural Resources Department worked with US EPA, the state of Maine, and the Houlton Water Company, which is in our local town, to take appropriate steps to address this problem. And over on the right, you'll see where eroded farm soils in the Mactaquack took place after farmers had plowed and then we had a rainstorm. So we've worked with local farmers on agricultural practices as well, such as with riparian buffers to reduce the soil loss. And in the center is the Mactaquack Dam. This is on the Wolastoq, located just north of Fredericton, New Brunswick. This dam is the first and largest barrier to sea-run fish passage in our watershed. There's a word in our language and it's pronounced Dolnabamic, and it means all my relations. This watershed and these rivers are more than just resources to use up. They're our relatives. Water is sacred and it is our duty to be stewards of these lands, these waters, and all of our relations that inhabit them. Today, we rarely see traditional seafaring fish that were so important to our survival, like salmon. Despite increasing issues with water quality, our people continue to rely on the river for sustenance. Due to substances like DDT and mercury in our waters, it's not safe to consume the amounts of fish that generations before us could. And in our river, the Mactaquack, the current guidance recommends no more than 2 fish meals per month. So you can see where this might cause a problem. Next slide, please. Above is an illustration of many structural and other best management practices we've adopted to keep our farm soil out of the river to serve as a model landowner. You can see staff and summer interns monitoring water quality at a watershed level to better understand the health of the Mactaquack and to better communicate the problems as well as their potential solutions. Next slide, please. Water quality, again, stretches beyond just us, but to our eagle population, which is sacred to us. We've tasked our Natural Resources Department with restoring the salmon and eagle populations, and through our work to improve water quality, have seen positive qualitative results. We not only have a pair of eagles that live on our river, but each year we are observing multiple juvenile eagles at various stages. I believe that this is a direct result of a healthier river. If you take a look at these slides here, this is a project that was recently completed, and it was again a partnership of many agencies, federal and local, along with the town. So we're able to take care of this culvert. And so on the right, the bottom right, this is afterwards. Next slide, please. While the methods are far from traditional, it remains our responsibility to adapt and overcome obstacles to restoring this ecosystem in our traditional lands. And if you'll take a look, this is, this is for our Mactaquack watershed, which is part of the larger St. John. The red dots are culvert projects that we've done in partnership with agencies and local governments, town governments. The yellow lines are restoration projects that have already taken place along the river. And then the orange are future projects. However, I think this might be a little outdated. There are some that are already taking place. So in the orange, there may be some that could be yellow or in that transition. Next slide, please. Again, this is just another photo of the Mactaquack Dam, which I talked about earlier. And if you'll, next slide. So this is a table that shows the decline of the Atlantic salmon returning since the construction of the dam that I showed in the previous picture, the Mactaquack Dam. It was built in 1968. So you'll see the sharp decrease in salmon returning. Next slide, please. Around 2008, the Maliseet Nation Conservation Council invited us to participate in a transboundary watershed management planning process for the Wolastoq St. John. In 2010, we invited MNCC to a meeting with the Army Corps of Engineers to discuss possible Corps assistance in developing that plan. Project partners discussed engaging the International Joint Commission as a possible platform for plan development. In 2013, New Brunswick Power initiated a public scoping process of several options to address failing concrete in the Mactaquack Dam, one of which was dam removal. This led to the project partners to consider a transboundary interagency process similar to one that was occurring on the, I'm sorry, I can't say it's St. Croix Watershed on the coast. Our first Transboundary Watershed Summit was held on April 6, 2016. Many of those participants signed an interim statement of cooperation on May 31st, 2017. This did not result in an International Joint Commission Watershed Board, but forged a new Indigenous-led process where the Maliseet Nation invites US and Canadian agencies to work collaboratively with us to restore the Wolastoq St. John. While it has been a challenge to maintain momentum through the pandemic, this work remains critically important to the health of our watershed and all that inhabit it. I want to thank you for the opportunity to join you today and talk a little bit about our territory.
Quay Nita, Delawizin, Zogam Ross Perley. Hello, everybody, friends. My name is Ross Perley. I'm the chief of Goodkuck, also known as Tobique First Nation. We are the Maliseet community with the largest population located in northeastern New Brunswick or northwestern New Brunswick. The river, the Wolastoq, also known as the St. John River, connects us all. The river and its tributaries transcends borders and it connects the whole nation from Quebec to the Bay of Fundy. Our culture, our existence here in the Goodkuck is because of the Wolastoq. We wouldn't be alive or exist today if not for the resources that it provided us over hundreds of years. Today we are struggling to preserve the Wolastoq. We want to ensure that the next 7 generations are able to value the Wolastoq as our ancestors have. The biggest part of our culture here was salmon. The salmon kept us alive. The salmon gave our fishermen a role in the community to provide. And for generations, our lives evolved around the run of the salmon. Today, it don't exist. Our lands were stolen. Governments decided to build hydro dams surrounding our communities. These dams destroyed our way of life. A lot of our people have suffered because of it. And at the same time, governments neglected to take care of the valuable resources that the Wolastoq provided. So it's our job as a nation. We're here because of the Wolastoq. It's our job to make sure that we take care of it. We take care of her and ensure that our next generations are able to enjoy the Wolastoq as our ancestors have. We started the transboundary cooperation agreement so that we can work together with our sister nations from the United States, with government agencies in the States, in Canada, and work in cooperation to preserve and take care of our water and watershed and wildlife. And all of that provides teachings and cultural values to our young people. And that's what we wanted to preserve. It's our job as leaders to ensure that's preserved, to ensure that species still have a chance to run in our river, that maybe someday our children or grandchildren can enjoy harvesting from the river. Ensure that big corporations, when they pollute our river through spills or any other environmental violations, that they are held accountable to that. And it's our job to make sure that happens. And we need to work together, nation to nation, the Wolastoq Nation, the United States and Canada to ensure that that happens. We need to do our best to restore the river, the watershed, protect the species that are at risk, all so that the next generations can enjoy moving forward. And then it becomes their job to take care of our beautiful river. Cooperation agreement also gives us an opportunity to work together and have guardians to ensure that the polluters are accountable, to ensure that waste and pollutions are cleaned up, and to ensure that our organizations like the Maliseet Nation Conservation Council and their science programs are able to function and thrive in the future. So that's what I'm here today to talk about, is the agreement, what it means to me as a chief and my community and our elders and our youth, and how we can work together to ensure that the Wolastoq that spans both of our nations are both, that we're both working together to preserve it. Lewan, thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ken Maraf from EPA's New England office in Boston, and I'm really happy to be here today. And I thank the Salazar Center for bringing us all together. And thank you, Chief Sabattis and Chief Perley, for your words. When the Houlton Band of Maliseet Indians approached EPA in 2015 to tell us about the scoping process for the Mactaquack Dam, we were eager to get involved, because one of our core goals at EPA is to protect water quality. And that means more than just reducing concentrations of pollution in the water. The water quality standards that our states adopt but EPA approves generally do include protections for aquatic life. So restoration of fish species like the Atlantic salmon is consistent with EPA's regulatory responsibility and our overall mission to protect human health and the environment. We know that without Atlantic salmon and other important fish species in these waters, the Houlton Band tribal members cannot fully exercise their cultural practices, and we heard about that from the chiefs, as well as their right to sustenance fishing, which are both protected under the water quality standards that EPA has approved. So when the Houlton Band approached us in 2015, the tribe requested that EPA convene other parties, including US and Canadian federal agencies, along with the Maliseet First Nations, to come together and form a collaboration. And this convening is a very important tool for EPA that we often will use. Government agencies have a lot of resources and a lot of authorities, but within a defined area of responsibility. So when you come to a complex environmental problem like restoring a large watershed, that can require a number of different agencies to come together, each with their own responsibilities and resources and tools. So we will often play that role of bringing together and convening multiple agencies so that we have all the tools that we need to really tackle the problem. If we all worked on our own in an uncoordinated way, we would all do good things, but we wouldn't be able to put it together into an approach that really can solve the problem. No one would be looking at the issues in a coordinated way, a holistic way. And when we do a convening, we can look at the whole picture. We can talk about all the possible actions that are needed to really address the problem. We can identify where there might be gaps in our authorities. We can figure out what tools each of us has and how to use them together to accomplish something that no one agency or government could do on its own. So we drew on those relationships that we have with other agencies, and we helped to convene the parties. And the first summit was held in 2016. So I want to talk a little bit about how we see our role in this process. EPA is a regulatory agency, and in that regulatory role, we're used to being the decision makers. We're used to thinking our job is to make the best choice we can based on what the science tells us and what the law tells us. We will often seek input from stakeholders, but it's our job to weigh the facts and make a decision. That is not how we are approaching this collaboration, and that wouldn't be an appropriate way to approach it. We're not making a regulatory decision here. Instead, we are fulfilling the trust responsibility that we have, guided by our government-to-government relationship with the Houlton Band of Maliseet Indians. We are working with sovereign tribal nations who are partners, not stakeholders in this project. And with that in mind, we strive to really listen, to understand the goals and interests of the tribal nations, and to support and empower as much as we can the tribes to achieve their goals and not to pursue our own agenda. Of course, we do have our own mission, and that's true of all the agencies who are participating in this collaboration. Every agency has its own goals, its own interests, and we hope that this collaboration will help us achieve those goals to some extent, but we always keep in mind that the overarching purpose of this collaboration is to help the tribal nations meet their goals for restoration of this river and for restoration of fish passage. So I'd like to move on to talk about the kinds of resources that EPA can bring to a collaboration like this. And there are many different kinds. One type of resource that we can provide is technical expertise. And as an example, we've worked with our Canadian counterparts in the Division of Fisheries and Oceans to pull together and compare data on the ecological health of the watershed and to identify specific areas that have been impaired and to help us prioritize where are the most important restoration needs. We also can bring research capacity to the table. We are now partnering with both the Houlton Band and the Maliseet Nation, as well as DFO Canada, on a genetic study of Atlantic salmon so that when the watershed is restored, we can use that genetic information to restore the appropriate native strain of salmon in each tributary of the watershed. So technical expertise, research capacity. We also bring funding to the table, and this can be very important. Through our Clean Water Act authorities, we do provide the tribes with funding for water quality monitoring, for non-point source pollution reduction, and that funding can help the tribes both monitor the waters and restore impaired watersheds. And of course, we also do bring regulatory authority to the table. And under the Clean Water Act, we do have tools related to water quality standards, related to regulation of discharges to US waters, and to fish passage. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, very important, our convening authority to bring parties together and assemble a team that has all the tools that we need for a successful restoration. So how are we doing? We have had 7 transboundary summits so far to develop relationships, to discuss the issues, to develop a framework to move forward, to meet the goals. In 2016, as was mentioned, all of the parties signed a statement of cooperation, and we're currently working to get signatures on a statement of co-stewardship to further the goals of the collaborative. So in thinking about how successful we've been, I'd like to say that it's good that we've launched a collaboration. It's good that we've brought together a wide range of expertise and resources. It's good that we've all committed to work together toward the goal, but we have a long way to go to achieve that goal. And I'd like to be candid and say there are some real challenges in a project like this. On the one hand, it's a wonderful feeling to come together with so many partners with all the different tools and so on. And it's good that we've had meetings where we've developed good relationships and a feeling that we're working together. But we can't avoid the fact that sometimes different agencies will have different goals and different agendas and different authorities. And as someone who works in a government agency, I can say government agencies live in a very complicated world. We each have our own set of constraints, of political sensitivities, of pressure points. We have different skill sets, different levels of resources. There are things that we have a great capability to do, but also things that are hard for us to do. And each agency faces its own small universe of capabilities and constraints. We may work at different paces. There may be agencies that are used to moving faster than others for all kinds of reasons. And the political currents that are present at any given time might affect what any of us are able to do. And all that becomes even more complicated and challenging when you're working across jurisdictional lines. We all know that watersheds do not respect political boundaries, but those boundaries do present an extra challenge when you're talking about actions that need to cross jurisdictional lines. So that's a lot of challenges, but challenges are there to be overcome. So how do we do that? How do we make sure we're continuing to make progress and don't get bogged down? So just a couple of thoughts. One is it's really important for us all to be aware of the differences between the agencies and what their capabilities are and what they're able to do and not do. And to understand that every partner in this collaboration, all the agencies, and also including the tribal governments, has to navigate their own complicated environment. And as much as we can help each other do that, we need to keep that in mind. But the second thing is, and this is very important, is to stay committed to the goal and not let these differences and constraints prevent us from moving forward. The path on a project like this, when so many people are involved, is never going to be as straight and direct as we would like. We may need to wind around, we may need to detour around an obstacle, but we need to keep moving down the path. So it takes real commitment over the long term. I would like to close by saying we do have a lot working in our favor right now. The current administration is putting an enormous emphasis on equity, and at the highest levels has made a renewed commitment to strengthen our relationship with tribal nations. And at the same time, we have historic funding opportunities as a result of the bipartisan infrastructure law. So with all that working in our favor, we do have great hope that EPA and our federal agencies, working with our tribal and First Nation partners, can make real strides and take real actions to restore the Wolastoq River watershed, and along with it, all of the aquatic resources that the Houlton Band and the Maliseet Nation depend on for sustenance. So I'll close with that. I'd like to thank everyone for joining and for your time, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Patricia, for that beautiful opening, and to Chief Sabattis and Perley and Ken Maraf for your thoughts. I'm going to take some time now to just dig in and open our dialogue with some facilitated questions, and I encourage all of you to continue putting more questions in the chat. I'll start just by asking, Ken, you had talked, actually all three of you had talked, about the process that the collaboration has gone through and really touched on some of the success points to date. But I'm wondering if each of you might want to share just sort of your thoughts on what, for this collaborative, what is the vision of success? What do you know what will success look like when the collaboration has succeeded, and what are you most optimistic about? And maybe I'll offer up to Chief Sabattis to start if she'd like to share any of her thoughts.
The grand vision of success for me would be some dam removals. I would love to see, I know that there are salmon in the Mactaquack. However, what we've seen is over that transboundary line. So they're in Canada. And even though we really have a much healthier river now, we've yet to see them here. And so that's our overall goal, is really having a healthier river, not just because of the work that we're doing, but the work that's also taking place on the other side in Canada. And really, for me, I think reinvigorating some of the work that had been taking place and coming up with this, the tool that we can implement.
Thanks for that. Chief Ross Perley, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to add to that, or Patricia?
Well, I think Chief Sabattis said it well. It's, we would like to reclaim and restore the river, and the biggest barriers are the hydro dams. I think on the whole watershed, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hydro dams just in a 100-kilometer radius. So that has a big impact on the health of the river. And I think one of my biggest goals would be someday for youth to be able to harvest out of the river at some point.
Patricia or Ken, do either of you have any additional thoughts that you want to share on that?
Sure. I just quickly would like to say that, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada did do a study back in 2014, and they did identify the hydro development dams as the #1 threat to our population of Atlantic salmon. So it is without a doubt the #1 issue as discussed by our leadership, our chiefs here. And, I think I understand that Chief Perley was going to refer to an initiative that is also part of the barrier to us having a more understood and meaningful relationship to the Wolastoq, and that is the naming of our river. And so I would just ask if Chief Perley might refer to that in a couple of comments.
Yeah, well, St. John isn't the origin of our river. Her real name and original name is the Wolastoq, and St. John really has no significance to our culture, or not much significance in New Brunswick at all. But yet we still carry that name that was given, to her by colonizers. And to make things right, we support giving the river her name back, which is the Wolastoq, her real name, the original name, and the name that she should be called for time immemorial. And whatever we got to do, I know that there's a process to do that, but it's going to take both the United States and Canada and our nation in order to do it. We just need the commitment from all three parties and the will to get it done.
Thank you for that. Ken, did you have any, I know you touched a little bit on that, the idea of success in your talking points, but is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's very, I'll echo what we heard earlier, both, but I think it's important to underscore, it's really important in an initiative like this to have the environmental goal be the goal, and to have the salmon return to where they are supposed to be. To me, that will be success, to have that happen, and then to have everyone who's been part of this wonderful coalition to then be committed to make sure that it stays that way.
Well, just building on that a little bit and thinking about success for this collaborative effort, what do you think for all of you, what is, from your perspective, what is the greatest need right now to start moving forward to achieve that success and seeing salmon thrive in the Wolastoq and the water quality and the habitat coming back? And maybe we'll just run back through from the beginning again. And Chief Sabattis, if you want to touch on your thoughts on that.
I mean, I think I'm going to take this from a different angle, if you don't mind. So for me, one of the largest barriers is kind of what Ken touched on. And I think that there needs, even though these agencies, along with tribal nations, are communicating, I think that we have to somehow get over these barriers of what agencies are able to do and kind of getting on the same page. And I think that obviously the people at the table, for the most part, our goal is the same or similar, but we really need to overcome, some of these agency and political barriers. And I think that some of that decision making is not up to us as tribes, but it is not impossible for different agencies. So I guess I don't know if that really answered your question, but
No, that's great. That's perfect. Chief Perley, do you have any thoughts on, like, from your perspective, in the collaboration and just in your day-to-day role, what do you think is the greatest need to help ensure success of the collaborative?
Well, I think navigating the bureaucracy is one of the biggest challenges.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it was just up to the nation, the tribal nations, all this would be in action and done already. But, obviously there's a lot of red tape, there's bureaucracy, there's elections, there's all these other little factors that slow things down, the pandemic most recently. So having, willing partners, like committed, willing to actually make some decisions and willing to, put some resources where they need to be, I think that would go a long way to getting us started on our goal.
Patricia or Ken, do you have any additional thoughts on that front for greatest needs for this collaborative?
Yeah, in my mind, a really important need right now is we need to shift all of our mindsets on the collaborative to away from. So we've been through a very productive phase of developing the collaborative, building relationships, starting to evaluate different options for things that could be done, doing a lot of research about the watershed. We need to shift from that to an implementation phase, and that needs to be a mindset that we all adopt, that now the work ahead of us is to actually develop the action items that could be taken and that need to be taken to get to the goals. So shifting from the formation and planning and relationship building stage into more of an implementation phase, where we're actually deciding on things that we're all going to do together, developing a whole menu of options that we could do, and then choosing actions that together will actually result in achieving the goal.
Well, that's a great just follow on to, there's a question in the chat from one of the audience curious about what are the priority actions that have been identified through the technical process with the collaborative. And I'm wondering, it sounds like maybe you're not there in the process yet, that the implementation actions haven't all been identified yet. That's correct.
Yeah, are you asking?
Yeah, I'm asking you.
Yeah, I think there probably is additional discussion that needs to go into all of those options, what analysis still needs to be done, and where we can go.
All right.
But the key really is going to be, we need to start seizing opportunities to do things and move forward. The collaboration began 6 or 7 years ago, and we've had a pandemic and so on, and it takes time to get something going, especially across an international boundary. But it is time to make that shift into really, really looking at what can be done and what needs to be done.
Patricia, did you have any additional thoughts on the greatest need for the collaborative right now to achieve success?
Yeah, I would just echo what's been said already, and the fact that we do need to essentially get moving again. The pandemic has, in a sense, delayed some of our in-person ability to create the dialogue that we so richly benefited from in our summits earlier on. And but however, as we all know, Canada and US, for example, are signing international agreements to deal with climate change, trying to address and reduce biodiversity loss. Like we are looking at governments that very much on the surface are supporting much of the work that we are doing. It's as Ken has said, we need to develop a depth to this now, so that the actual implementation of our cooperation is going to be able to produce some actual effect on the ground. And one of those, I guess, effects that I'm looking for in particular is a meaningful, volitional fish passage structure, which was assured to us through that process alluded to earlier that NB Power had undertaken in looking at what its options were for the dam in Mactaquack. And really, we've yet to see, other than some tinkering with the fish passage that's currently being done there, really there isn't a meaningful plan that has come into place yet. So I'm looking for that as a measure of some degree of success, in that we are going to be heard and understood that fish passage, essentially means the world to us. As Chief Perley said, we are, related because of that river. We live because of that river. Our nation's name is because of that river and all that it embodies, including our salmon. Our salmon brings so much nutrition and sustenance to our peoples that we really need to be able to find a solution that is workable. And as Ken has said, there is a number of jurisdictions and obstacles in play. However, the one thing that I have always shared around our table is that it's not about what we can't do. It's about what we can do. And I think that very much is representative of how we've gotten to be here today.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to shift to some questions that are in the chat box right now. We have a question from Christine Laporte. Thank you all so much. Is this transboundary agreement available to share so it might serve as a model for other partnerships and agencies? I'm thinking about forestry related partnerships as I'm involved in a related project. Patricia, maybe you want to take that question on? Or anyone really, is the agreement a publicly available document yet?
Are you talking about the statement of cooperation?
Yes, I'm assuming that is what Patricia is, or Christine is referring to.
Yeah, that's a public document, right? So I'm wondering whether I can put it in the chat.
You could probably send it to us and we can get it in the chat, or we can share it as a resource after the in the follow-up email with folks with all of your permissions. Yeah. Another question, has the joint planning effort allowed for a stronger voice in achieving fish passage goals with the hydroelectric projects on the river? I think, Patricia, you touched on this a little bit, but perhaps is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think, you know, as part of the transboundary work, there's actually been a process underway by a working group of sorts of technical experts within our Transboundary Summit process from the Canada and US agencies that have actually been examining, you know, the science and the technicalities behind what is being proposed actually as for the dam. So we are anticipating a report actually to come out of that collaborative assessment and review of the options for fish passage from our working committee on that topic. So, you know, we will be, of course, happy to share that once we have those results.
Excellent. Can Chief Sabattis or Chief Perley, is there anything you want to add to that? All right. So we've talked a little bit, or quite a bit, about sort of the government to government relationships, and really focused on, you know, the Maliseet's relationship with the federal agencies. But we have a question in the chat from Joshua Voigt, curious about what are the responsibilities of the province of New Brunswick Power, and therefore New Brunswick Power, to allow for the robust restoration of Atlantic salmon and the other sea-run fish to the Wolastoq. Perhaps Chief Perley and or Patricia, maybe you'd like to chime in on that question.
The province per se, they always defer to DFO. DFO is the fisheries government organization that we have, and department that we have to deal with when it comes to rivers and fish and wildlife. So if there's any issues that we have in regards to species at risk, or any other kind of maybe potential projects or some sort of consultation that needs to be done, we have to go through DFO, and Patty could probably add to that.
Yes, so we have, for example, through our transboundary process, really focused on the bilateral nature of the nation-to-nation relationship. And that is where, you know, we understand our treaty obligations to lie, our, you know, governance, our ability to receive information that is pertinent to the processes that we are trying to impact. So much of the focus has been with the federal level of governments. The provincial government has not been a big part yet of our process, because we are essentially establishing the parameters around the bilateral nature of our collaboration. Once we are able to, as we've said, implement a process, we will have a better understanding how we would incorporate potentially the provincial and state level governments. And that has been the direction given to us from leadership, given that there, and many from our neck of the woods would know that there has been somewhat a long-standing, contentious sometimes difficult relationship with both province and state governments, and that we are hoping, of course, that we could make some progress around those relationships, but we have maintained a primary focus so that we could establish what we think is some good common ground before expanding outwards.
Wonderful, thank you for that. We have another question from Jacob Van de Sand. We know that and I apologize if I don't pronounce this properly, Mactaquack, and I assume that's a dam, was evaluated and unfortunately is being rebuilt, but are other dams in the system up for relicensing or design life issues that could lead to removal? Can we be proactive towards removal of those other dams?
I think Patty or Sherry might be, oh, sorry, Ken.
No, go ahead. That's right.
Sherry, did you want to introduce yourself and take a stab at answering that question?
I certainly could. However, I'm not the most appropriate person to answer that question. These are dams that actually exist in New Brunswick, Canada. So my understanding is that they simply do not have the same process that we have on this side. So I'm not sure I can draw parallels to what we do over here versus what happens in Canada overall, and New Brunswick in particular.
And I would just like to comment that, you know, in terms of the pivotal nature of the Mactaquack Dam, and in relation to the tributary, the Mactaquack tributary that is flowing into the Houlton Band, that it is because of that, I guess, proximity that we need to focus, and we have been focusing quite a bit on the Mactaquack Dam, and the other dams. Actually, the whole system relies on the Mactaquack Dam and its infrastructure, and so it's really not easy per se to parse out, you know, just identifying the other dams as potential areas that really the critical location and nature of the Mactaquack Dam to the whole system is essentially where our focus is at, because of the fact that so much of the fish passage and the deleterious, the negative effects that is happening is because of that dam, and the other dams, of course, are contributing, but in terms of the centrality of that Mactaquack Dam and the importance to the Mactaquack and potential fish passage there, we have been focusing on the Mactaquack Dam.
Wonderful. We probably have time for one or two more questions. Chief Perley, in your presentation, you mentioned just in passing something about, you referenced the Indigenous Guardians. And I'm wondering if you could maybe explain that a little bit to our audience members who may not be as familiar to the concept of Indigenous Guardians and what their role is within the work that all of you do.
I think he had to leave.
Yeah, it looks like he had to leave.
Patricia, would you have any thoughts on the Indigenous Guardians?
Right. Well, I cannot speak to the comment that Chief Ross made, But I will speak to more generally how Indigenous Guardians are regarded within Canada. They have an essential role to play in terms of being what's regarded as the eyes and ears for our people on the ground, to be both monitoring and possibly enforcing what is needed within the conservation and stewardship of, you know, a particular area, or ostensibly what Chief Ross was referring to was our waters and our watershed. So, you know, I may not be as aware as he is of what he was alluding to in making that comment, but I know that, you know, several communities, First Nations have been undertaking to create Indigenous Guardians training and occupation, like as in a calling to do work on our lands and waters that is essentially for conservation and stewardship.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's just, the Indigenous Guardian programs are remarkably interesting, and I think such a wonderful addition to the work that happens on the ground. I'll just ask this one last question and then we'll close up our webinar for the day. In thinking about the challenges that you all described with the dams and the difficulties of removing dams as a solution, are there alternatives to dam removal? Are there other solutions that could be looked at? And I'll open that to all of you.
I know that we've discussed, you know, different types of fish passage, but again, I think that some of that is a little more technical for me, but I mean, that would be the alternative. I don't know that we've found something that really is still healthy for the fish, but again, I think I'll defer to some of our technical experts that are on.
Patricia or Ken, do you have any thoughts on alternatives to dam removal?
Well, I think Patty already mentioned volitional passage as one of the things being looked at, and you know, there are all kinds of. I'm also not a technical expert, so I'm not going to go very far into this. But we've all seen at many different dams, there are different approaches and different mechanisms for moving fish around a dam. Not as good, obviously, as removing the dam itself and restoring more of a natural system. But those are the kinds of things, and Patty is probably closer than I am to exactly what's still being looked at and where there might still be possible opportunities. So being at the limit of my expertise, I'm going to stop and see if Patty or Sherry wants to add.
Patricia, do you have any thoughts?
I think Sherry was going to share something. I'll let her go first.
Yes, thank you, Patty. I think I want to point out that alternatives to dam removal, the various fish passage options that are being considered right now by the various fish passage experts that Patty has discussed, does not address the other barrier that really is not considered when we think about dam removal versus fish passage, and that is the head pond. So the Mactaquack Dam has a 50-mile, I can't tell you what that is in kilometers, head pond. No matter what we do for fish passage at the dam, it will not do anything to address and alleviate the fish passage barrier that is created by the head pond.
All right, so challenges ahead with thinking about alternatives. Well, we are, I think, at the end of our question and answer period. I'm going to invite Patricia back to do a closing prayer, and then I will say a few short words after that. So Patricia, please.
I just wanted to say, Waliwan, thank you to everyone who joined us here today. Waliwan, to our leadership who have, generously given their time and energy to always helping in the best way possible by sharing your presence and your thoughts on the situation. Of course, to Ken with EPA, we always appreciate your leadership, and of course to Jen with the Salazar Center, and for having invited us. I'm really appreciative of that. I also want to say Waliwan, Giziolinag, Waliwan, Nokmasanuk, Waliwan Musam Sanuk. Thank you, Creator. Thank you, grandmothers. Thank you, grandfathers, for helping us with this discussion today, and to always be mindful of how we are all related, how in this circle of life we remain connected, and we really do have to find ways to speak on behalf of those who do not have a voice, and of our relations, all of our relations, because as we know, our planet is changing so much. And so, I offer a song, it's the Mother Earth song, that really honors how we are related, and of course the love that we have for Mother Earth. The first song I sang was actually a song that was provided through my cousin Gwen Bear, and it's a beautiful song about the Wolastoq, and it's meant to be an honor song for our river. The song I'm about to sing is a song for our mother, the earth. Waliwan. Gachi gal was in you, oh, you. Gachi gal was in you, oh, you. Skid comic dot cook, see the you, oh, you. Away, hey, ha. Away, hey, hey, hey. Away, hey, ha. Away, hey, hey. Till dead, no, you, oh, you. Till dead, no, you, oh, you. Skid comic dot cook, see the you, oh, you. Away, hey, ha. Away, hey, hey. Away, hey, ha. Away, hey.
Thank you so much for that, Patricia. And thank you, Chief Clarissa Sabattis, Chief Perley, who's no longer with us on the webinar, and Maraf, for your sharing your thoughts on this amazing partnership and collaboration. I deeply appreciate the time that you guys all put into being here with us today. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining us. As I mentioned, you will receive an email with the recording link as soon as it's available. That should be in the next day or two. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.